And I'm very happy that you're all here after your lunch break and in your very last session. I'll try to make this fun and entertaining for you. How many of you have ever done some sort of network analysis? Almost all of you. How many of you have ever done some sort of text data analysis? And how many of you have done this, both on the same project? Aha! How did it go? Did you hand code things? Did people who hand-coded things get annoyed ever when doing that? That was me. That was me. That was the whole motivation. I was sitting there and I thought, how cool would it be to not only do content analysis where you count things in text data and see how often they occur, and then you make this vague assumption that frequency of occurrence translates into importance. Debatable, but that's what content analysis is kind of about. So you do that, but then you could also look at the connections between the things. It's not only that Clinton and Bush are mentioned, but what's the relationship between them? In what way are they co-mentioned? Then you do, and then try to do this by hand. Has anybody ever done that? Looked for a Ed, did you like it? Really? See, this is how many of you have seen the John Nash movie, The Beautiful Mind? Who remembers what John Nash was doing in the barn or in his little back house? What did he do? He did network text analysis. And what happened to John Nash? Right? Do we remember? That was me too. At some point I thought, this is not going to happen by hand. This has to be automated in some way. And I'll talk about how we can take text data and make it useful for network analysis. All right, so here are two quotes. They are both from communication science scholars, actually. One of them says, we cannot reduce communication to message transmission. What we often do, how many of you have built communication data networks, like networks between email senders or something, or people in a meeting, or people who talk to each other on the phone? So what we often do there is we take the people who Mark sends an email to Ben. So we have Ben as a node, we have Mark as a node, and a link from Mark to Ben. This is how those networks often look like. And then we have all those communication partners, and we can look at the network of communication interaction and do our classic network analysis. What we often don't look at is, what do they talk about? And another good question is, does that matter? Does it matter that we look into the content of communication, or does it not? And honestly, we don't have a whole lot of good answers to that. Sounds like a trivial question. PhD students, pay attention. Sounds like a good question. But we don't have a whole lot of hard answers to that. When does it actually make sense to consider the content of communication for looking at networks? I don't know. I have a few answers from my empirical work, but not a theory or something. Another one says, traveling through the networks of leads of social objects, which could be, for example, language, knowledge, ideas, information. So whenever we have that, sometimes we actually might want to not only consider the structure of who is talking to whom, but also looking in one way or another, and what are you talking about? And all my research fits kind of this model. So I do three things, and I really do only work at the intersection of any two of them, all three of them. One of them is social science and network analysis. And what I mainly get from that domain, or what I use from that domain, are models and theories that give me some theoretical grounding of my work and that I can use, or I test some theories from that domain. But this is where my theory mainly comes from. Then I use natural language processing to analyze text data. And within the field of natural language processing, which is really large-scale data mining, can also be small-scale actually, I often try to identify relevant pieces of information from some text data. And I'll show you plenty of examples for that. And then I use a lot of machine learning. How many of you are familiar with machine learning? A little bit. So what machine learning does is it tries to learn on its own or find on its own patterns and regularities in a little bit of sample data that you show to the learner, and use that to make decisions, predictions to new and unseen data. Like a baby learning a language. You tell a kid a little bit, and then you expect that it develops this understanding of how your language structures and functions and can form a coherent new sentence with a little bit of practice and training. That's what machine learning is. All right. So when people talk about networks of words, something that people often think of is semantic networks. And this is a classic example for a semantic network. And it works like this. You tell people a word or a concept, and you ask them, what do you associate that with? What does that remind you of? What do you think of when you hear that? So for example, when you tell people red, something that might come up is other languages, up in this cluster here, no other colors, up in this cluster here, things related to fruit, things related to flowers, and so on and so forth. And then you can see that there are some naturally emerging clusters which kind of get you the meaning of the concept of red. So the meaning in classic semantic network analysis, in classic semantic network theory, the meaning of a word is its one-step environment. Whatever gets activated when you ping something in the one-step environment defines the meaning of a word, and by clustering those things, you can disambiguate those different meanings. That's the classic assumption, and this is old stuff. This is from the 1970s, from a theory called spreading activation theory, which basically says that you give people a prime, and then whatever comes up, either they say it or you collect it from interview data or whatever they have. This is the meaning that one person associates with that term, or group, or a whole collective. Now the world has evolved a lot since then, and the way I'm approaching this problem goes kind of like this. We have a whole bunch of text data from all sorts of sources. Can be nice, clean, well-written newswire data where you have some coherent syntax and semantics. Can be messy text messages and social media data where you have a lot of emoticons and additional things that are typed down. Can be email data, it can be lengthy legal reports, all of those things. Then what I do is I put these through some methodology, through some computational tools, in order to do two things really, and I'll talk about both of them. One of them is sometimes we do not have a network available. Sometimes we want to understand a network of people, or of things, or of knowledge, or whatever, but we cannot go and ask people. In those cases, we might have written documents about the phenomenon, about the situation or system we want to study that we could either read through or analyze in some automated fashion in order to construct that network data. Let me ask you, can somebody think of an example where you would want to construct network data, but you cannot go and do a survey, or you cannot go and do a survey? Any suggestions? Where might that apply? You want to study a social... No, Mark.
I love answering questions and getting them right.
Well, let's see.
Animals.
That is a good point. Animals, or yeah, that's a good point. And people do. People study. Have you talked about ecosystems and biological networks and food chains? All right. Well, we can still observe them. That's a good point. So, any idea for systems where we cannot do observations and we cannot do questionnaires and interviews? Yay.
Dead authors.
Oh, pardon me?
Dead authors.
Dead authors, which also translates into anything that's not there anymore. Bankrupt companies, that's something that I've been doing. Things that aren't around anymore, archival data, all of those things from the past. Exactly. Something else? Yeah?
Terrorist networks.
Exactly. I've been doing that too. We call them more modestly covert networks, where you could ask them, but you don't want to for several reasons. One, it might not be very healthy. B, those people might lie anyways, or not give you the right answer. And we know a little bit about the ways of how people falsify their name or their birth date or their license plate or whatever. Typically change to phonetic spelling or add one digit to the last digit in your social security number or something like that. But those are situations where you couldn't do that. That's right. And the third instance would be what I just showed you, things that are in your mind but that are not written down, cognitive models, cognitive structures, mental models. That's a third domain where we could do an interview there, but it's hard to observe right away. All right, so sometimes when we want to study historic networks or very large networks where we can't go to, we might want to do something automated with a lot of the text data that, for example, the dead authors have written, or the emails that the people in a bankrupt company have exchanged, and their annual reports and their mission statements and what. And oftentimes there's a lot of text data. It's not that we don't have enough of text data. So typically a lot of that there. Even when you collect network data, oftentimes text data is a natural byproduct that you get along the way if you want it or not. One example would be email data, for example. So you have this corpus of emails or authors, or has anybody ever done co-citation analysis or co-publishing analysis? Right? So you have all those things, who cites whom or who publishes with whom, but then you also have the whole paper, for example, right? All right, so in situations where we have that, we have all our text data, we put it through a machine that gives us reliable, scalable, robust findings or network data, and those are hard things to achieve. Scalable, not so much, but reliable and robust is harder to do. And then we can use it for whatever you want to use it. Then you have your network data. You can use it to answer substantive questions about a social system, to ask graph theoretical questions, statistical properties about a network. You can feed it into a database and do a search and retrieval later on. Or you can use it as input for further computations. For example, once you have your social network, you could ask what would happen if we brought in 3 new content editors into this group of editors in Wikipedia. Or what would happen if whatever intervention or policy you want to design and bring into a system, you could use simulations in order to study the impact of what you're doing. But in order to do that, you have to have some network data. All right. Let me give you an example. At some point, I was sitting at Carnegie Mellon in my office, and my advisor, Kevin Corley, knocked on my door and said, Jana, here's what you need to do. You need to develop, evaluate, apply a methodology and computational solution for mapping pretty much everything that's going on in the Sudan right now over the last kind of 10 years as a network. Okay. The Sudan is, I had no idea, so I basically went to Google Maps and realized it's a darn big country. It's really large. Really large, there's a lot of people. It's in Northeast Africa. It's now 2 countries, South Sudan and Sudan. They split up as of June last year. It's not going very well. They used, what people often know about with respect to Sudan is the Darfur crisis, where there's a lot more trouble there. They have oil in the ground, and it's sitting there, and they are trying to extract it, but it's not going very well for multiple reasons. Most of the oil is in the south. The south doesn't have any access to a coastline. They could go through the north, but the north will charge them a lot to go through. They could build a pipeline through Uganda, but they need investors from China to do that. They are religiously split. There are a lot of Arabic cultures and religions in the north, and Christians and native cultures in the south, and armed rebel groups controlling the country, Sudanese People Liberation Army, for example, or LRA. So they have all those problems. And what we wanted to do is see who are key stakeholders, what topics or what themes are they associated with, and how might this evolve into the future. So if we have a network from, let's say, 2000 to 2010, can we use that to simulate what it might look like a year after? So what I did, theory, I sat down and said, okay, there are many ways to extract network data from text data. Those are them. Those are the basic families that exist for constructing relational information out of text data. If you know, you can use this for creating lengthy discussions in linguistics courses. But so I reviewed those methods with respect to 3 things. First of all, can those methods be automated? If it says green, that means yes. If it says orange, it says somewhat, but you have to do some manual stuff. And if it says red, it's a flat out no. Second question was, can we do abstractions on levels of generality? Can I look for a word and know that this word is not only Mark Smith, but an agent? Or it's not only University of Maryland, but a location? Or it's not only a computer, but a certain sort of a resource? So can we have some abstraction according to an ontology that's predefined or derived from the data? And again, green, yellow, red scale. And does it generalize? Once we have a methodology, or once we have a model that lets us get these data and construct these data from text data, can we expect to take the model or the method or the tool, apply it to some new data set from a different domain or different text type or different, instead of different domain or different publishing date or something, can be expected to generalize with reasonable accuracy to a new and unseen domain. And when we look at those things, the only thing that came out from me for achieving automation, abstraction, and generalization were probabilistic graphical models, which is a subfield of machine learning. And I said, okay, so see, this is for grad students. If you really like a method, make a chart of all the methods that are out there in a field, classify them according to some dimensions that are relevant for you, and make sure that what you want to work with, what you want to use, actually is the most suitable thing for your thing, as opposed to going to your advisor and say, we'll use semantic grammars. Somebody will ask you at some point, why that method, and why not centering resonance analysis or something like that. All right, so I use probabilistic graphical models, and I will not go much into that other than telling you, I'll give you the recipe for how they work in a second. So the next thing I did was thinking about what do we want to know about in a Sudan? What types of nodes do we want to have in a network? What kinds of things are relevant to consider? So for one, social agents, people and groups. Any reference to a person or to a group you want to get from the text data. From that, you can build a classic social network, right? But then we might also be interested in places, references to places. We might also want to extract tasks and events, a meeting, an aid agency providing support, people leaving for a refugee camp or coming back from a refugee camp, people building it well. All those things are tasks and events that might be very relevant for studying current issues, future developments in a country like Sudan. Then things that refer to the how of something is happening, resources and knowledge. What do people have at their disposal? What can they use? Natural resources, weapons, computers, whatever you have, all sorts of resources that you may have or not have. Information and knowledge, what kind of knowledge is floating around, what do people know, what skills do they have. And then we also looked at beliefs and sentiments, which is something that Jen Goldbeck talked about. So for example, in what way is something perceived, what knowledge do people have about something, and of course we want to do this over time. So we also need to find time references. Some things might be from the past, from the very remote past or very distant past, things for now, and then, for example, discussions about future events, like they had a peace referendum that was running out a year ago, and where they would decide whether they would split up or not. All right, so those are the sorts of things we want to extract from the data. Does that make sense to people? We are not only looking at instances of people or references of people in the text data, but all those other things too. And not only that, those things can be referred to with a specific mention, like Ben Town, for example, is a specific reference, or Ben could be referred to in a very generic way, a student, a person from Pittsburgh, or something like that. So sometimes you have references to specific individuals, and that's sociologically, that's a big distinction. You might have references to specific things with a name, or to the collective, to the kind of thing, to the type of thing, to the group of people. And oftentimes, those extractors let you pull out specific things. That's a lot easier to do because they have a different surface pattern with capitalization, all that, than finding references to collectives and more generic references. But when you talk, for example, about resources, also finding things like rice and beans and potable water and all of those things might be relevant as well. So I wanted to make sure that I get the specific and the generic references. And then here's basically how this is being done, and I'll try to say this in a way so that everybody thinks you can do that too, because you can. You get first some labeled data where somebody, it's typically a well-paid person, sat down. It better be a well-paid person. Somebody sat down and took some text data and marked all examples of what you're looking for in these data. A provider I often work with is called Linguistic Data Consortium. They have very well-skilled, very well-trained people who provide these data with very high accuracy. So I don't have to do it. Or I will not make my grad students annotate data for machine learning if I don't absolutely have to. Want to talk again about mental sanity, right? It's possible, but at a scale you need that in order to build a good model. You need a lot of these data, and then you need 2 people to annotate it. And then you need to measure intercoder reliability, and it can take a very long time. And so what I often try is to find data that somebody has already annotated. Maybe they did it in a little bit of a different naming convention or something, but spend some time to look hard if you need to do supervised learning and see if somebody did that job already for you. They might have done a good job. And if they did, you might appreciate it, actually. Okay, so we have some supervised data, and then we basically give this data to a tool that looks for all sorts of clues it can find about every single marked up thing. The word itself, how it is embedded in context, how it's embedded into a larger collection of documents, what's right before it, what's right after it, what's surrounding it in a larger context, all of those things. And the things that I typically consider is everything lexical, so what's the word and everything related to, the next word, the previous word, syntax, the grammar, the structure of something, and a lot of statistical information from the data. And then you basically give this annotated marked up data to the system. It will figure out all those features, or you tell them what clues features to use. And then it will come up with a prediction model that you can apply to new data and let it label the new data. And these new data might have new words, new documents, all of that the learner has never seen. But because it can reason about every single word given its context and the word itself, it can tell you with some level of accuracy that we see a new thing, John Doe, and because we have observed similar things being referred to, we could say it's a person, most likely. It's a specific instance of a person, for example. So I built a thing like that. I look for all those things that I showed you: people, places, organizations, resources, knowledge, sentiment, tasks, all those things. And with distinction between generic and specific references. And the thing we built has about 87 to 89% accuracy. Now try to get to 80% intercoder reliability. Have people done this? Have people coded stuff for and measured intercoder reliability? 80 is not bad, right? 80 basically passes the reviewer threshold. Maybe, hopefully. I would let it pass. And then you make this available as a tool that people can use. Actually, this is available as a tool that people can use. It's it's part of a software called AutoMap that has those prediction models at different levels of specificity and fine-grainedness for text data. So you can use this for your work if you want to. Okay, so we have those things. So what I did was I collected the data text corpus. Actually, I was given and additionally enhanced a text corpus with about 80,000 documents about the Sudan. Those documents were collected from newswire sources. There were other documents going in from, there were legal documents like hearings at the International Criminal Court. There were subject matter expert reports. All of those documents together were taken into consideration. There were about 80,000 text files, which is not a whole lot. I applied that thing to it, which basically let me pull out all entities we are interested in. And then the question comes up, okay, once we have identified our entities, which are the potential nodes for our network, how do we connect them? And again, there are a lot of different methods, and I'll spare you another methods review, but there are a lot of methods for how you can identify things that show up in text data. The most common, and actually based on my validation and other validations, not terribly bad approach is to use something proximity-based that says if some things co-occur in the same sentence or in the same paragraph within a certain distance, they have something to do with each other. We don't know what, but they might share some sort of a relationship. And the results I'm showing you in here are based on that, but there are more sophisticated approaches for how to do that. We have done some of them, and those are some of the families of things you could use, but what you will see is basically based on co-occurrence. It's a very common method that people use when they look for things in text data and want to see how they are related. All right. So I extracted my network data, and this is the results for the social networks. I basically pulled out all specific agents I could find and did classic network analysis. I built a social network. In those charts, you see people. they are ranked with respect to a certain metric. You have talked about these things, right? Degree centrality, have you this week? Have you talked about different dimensions of power and influence? So I found my top people, I ranked them over the years from 2003 to 2010. This is how long my data set went, and they are colored according to different things. Red people or presidents or former presidents from the north, those are the key players. And I looked at them and I marked them up. So whatever is red are current or former presidents of the north, green or former or current presidents of South Sudan, orange are people you know and who some of them are not in power anymore, but those are presidents of neighboring countries. Those are the key players that came up. And then I was looking for those things, and there were some of the names that, even after dealing with Sudan for a while, I had never heard. And those were things like Hassan al-Turabi and Sadiq al-Mahdi, and I'm like, what? But luckily for this project, we had subject matter experts. Somebody who studies the Sudan is called a Sudanist. So we had a group of Sudanists. I went to my Sudanists at Rhode Island College. Their team is led by Richard Loban, who's a Sudanist. He had lived in Sudan for a long time. He had studied the Sudan. He's an anthropologist. And I said, Richard, who are those guys? And he said, oh, those are really old religious spiritual leaders. I'm not sure if they're still alive. They might be, but they are really old. One of them introduced Sharia law for Sudan many years ago. But the data are from 2003 to 2010, but when we go back into the data and look at occurrences of those or references to those names, it's often that people justify legal actions or proposals for a new constitution by referring back to the spiritual leaders that the country had. So some of those things might pop up as important entities, even though they are not around anymore or they are dead authors or whatever. All right, so we did that for people, and we also did it for organizations. Just the same thing. I did the same thing for organizations. I looked at all specific organizations and ran network centrality metrics over them and pulled out a group that and what you see here is everything in white are non-Sudanese groups. Everything, is that true? Everything in green are people from the Sudan, actual Sudanese organizations. And one thing that came out here was that among the top 10 groups, some of them are tribes. Dinka, for example, those, and tribes play a very central role in the Near and Mid East. Oftentimes, they control local units, but the presidents come from a certain tribe, and they will support their tribe. They have a lot of power and influence. Oftentimes, that's your clan. That's your important unit of operation in certain regions. So what we did was we pulled out all the tribes and looked at tribes. First of all, I pulled out all the tribes, and there were 243 tribes, and those things are pretty easy to verify for a subject matter expert. So I went to my subject matter expert, and we worked through the list of organizations and identified all the tribes in it. There were 243 in that country, and they have kind of as many languages in this country. And we looked at what topics connect them. So that's one thing you could do. Once you have extracted knowledge instances and people instances, you can always look at how are different people connected. What topics bring people together? Or what social clusters do we see with respect to a certain topic? So we looked at it, and those are coded on a higher level scale of topics. So we go from the word level to some higher aggregate of topics. And there you can see that, for example, with respect to degree centrality, one thing we see a lot is conflict in population. When we look at between this, there are more things related to economy and land use. So that's one thing you could do. Another thing I did was, for all the tribes that are either in conflict or in war with each other, and there are about 80 of them that are currently in war with each other. For all of them that are reported to be in conflict or war with each other, what resources are associated? Has anybody ever worked in conflict management or something like that? So one thing that people often look at is, when you have a conflict, what sort of resources is it about? What sort of natural resources is it about? Lootable, non-lootable, and there are a lot of theories about it. But what we and for those people, this is a useful methodology saying, okay, you don't need to go to Nigeria, to Kenya,
it's not a good example. But you might not necessarily go to a country and study all those things by observing them or sending your very expensive anthropologist there. Maybe you can do something like that and see, okay, who's in conflict with each other and what's the conflict about. So I did that. I did this mapping. The yellow nodes and the thing with the yellow circle around them indicates conflict and war. And everything, the green things are resources related to that. And there were a couple of things we could see here. And again, the interpretation was done in collaboration with my subject matter experts, because I could do it, but it's absolutely bogus if I do it. I could look at these data and say, I think this is going on. But if you have some subject matter experts who you can sit down with and they can help you and also point out errors there, that's very valuable. It takes a lot of time, but it's very valuable. Okay, and we saw some things. So one of the things that always stuck out are things related to dar. That's the Arabic word for homeland, and that's the homeland of a tribe. And so one big problem that we could see from that is oftentimes when people come back from refugee camps, and they might have been there, for example, at the border with Chad, there's a big refugee camp in Sudan. People were born there, people have lived there for 20 years or longer, and when they come back, somebody else has already claimed the original area that those people probably had. So you have a lot of civil conflict breaking out over that. Due to climate change in sub-Saharan Africa and also north of that, a lot of areas that used to have water, like the area around Lake Chad, are dried out. And people who have herds, cattle herds, who didn't move around much are moving more into the land of farmers who always had been in areas where there was plenty of water supply. Otherwise, they couldn't be there. But there were a lot of struggles between tribes that were primarily farmers versus herders and who tried to get access to water. Another big conflict. And a lot of conflicts related to oil and building transportation infrastructure for the oil. In fact, when you see civil conflicts breaking out over oil, it's not actually that the oil is already there. It's often that the promise of oil in the land is there, and then all the struggle starts about how do we get it out and who has access rights and who gets what sort of payment and all that. Yes?
Since you, maybe you want to delay this till the end, but since you were extracting these from published reports, isn't there a danger that you're not discovering the underlying reasons so much as the interpretation of the people reporting? So in other words, it may be that they are imposing theories about oil and so on.
Oh, absolutely. So this is not magic, right? What's in the data we will discover, and all the biases that are in the data will be in the results. There are ways you can mitigate this by using different data sources, or you could say, given this corpus from international analysts, these are the results, and what might be the biases in there, we don't know, but maybe some. And people always trust subject matter experts. I don't know, but people always do. And if you go somewhere and you send a validation methodologically, but if you say subject matter expert validated that, much better. I don't know, but I see this a lot happening with reviews. So when we go to our experts and say what biases you think are in there, they might be able to help us with that. But you're absolutely right. Whatever biases and propaganda and whatnot is in the text data will hopefully bubble to the surface and be made visible. I agree. Yeah?
I'm concerned with a different source of bias, not in the inputs, but in the interpretation. You have the subject matter experts interpreting these things. Do you have a sense of whether they're just saying the things that they thought before, or whether they're actually changing their mind as a result of the...
Oh, I will not doubt a subject matter expert explicitly. But maybe, and that's a big debate, and you could come up with pros and cons for either side of the debate. Maybe. I mean, of course, you also do this with network visualizations, right? You give people a picture of a network, and then they will interpret all those stories into it. And some of them might just be a reaction to what they see, and others might actually reveal underlying dynamics of what's really going on there. So some of that might just be reaction, other might be, fundamental causal things, whatever. It's hard for me to separate those things, I don't know. But that danger is always there as well, especially with visualizations.
But as an empirical question, was there any case where you showed it to some expert and the person said, wow, I never thought of that before?
Yeah, there were things like that. For example, the thing with farmers and herders, they could help me explain it, but when I saw all those things with crops and livestock and that, it didn't make a whole lot. I mean, it's a rural country, right? But still, why is it so prominent with respect to conflict and war? Whereas the thing with DARS and homeland conflicts or civil conflicts about native regions, that was much more obvious to them. Any other question right now? I like how you come up with those limitations and, all of those problems. That's the job of a researcher, yes. If I give this to political analysts, they're like, yes, we don't need to read all the reports anymore. If I give this to people like you, you're like, but there are all those biases and all that. Exactly. That's important to talk about. All right. So there I am, and I did this study, and somebody says, Jana, this whole information extraction and relation extraction thing from text data looks like a nice thing, but how accurate are your results actually? And then some other engineer comes along and says, well, she reported this accuracy metric. It's called F metric in my domain, and every domain has some sort of a F metric, whatever your accuracy measure is. This F is a combination of recall and precision. How many of the correct things do you retrieve? And out of all the things you retrieve, how many of them are actually correct? Then you build an average of that, and then you have your magical F measure. I don't even know what it stands for. But this is the measure we rely on. It says 87 to 89% good. And then he comes and says, well, but she has an F value, so we know how good it is. And then I stand there in my little grad student office and thought, yeah, that's right. They both are kind of right. Maybe just the F metric is not enough of an evaluation here. Maybe we need to ask some other question. So the F metric really tells us, the F metric answers a classic computer science question, which is how can we build a system that is this much better or this much faster than the system that a competitor has or some baseline that's out there. But what about other problems? And then I started to ask those other questions, which go like this. How much of a difference does the selection of a method for constructing network data make for the network we actually see? So how much of the results and structure of a network is due to methodological choices we as analysts made when we constructed the network data? This applies to survey data as much as it does to things extracted from text data. People have studied this for survey data, biases, all of those things. I did that for text data. And why does it matter? Well, for one, if we can tell people 5% of your network or your nodes or whatever are just due to the specific method you use, then people at least know. It increases the transparency and understanding we have of a method, and if we use different methods, it makes them more generalizable and comparable. So that's one of the research questions I ask a lot. It's a purely methodological question. And I'll show you where it went. So sometimes I do studies like that where I take the same data, so we have the same data set, I code it as a network with different methods, and then we look at how do those things compare. So here, this is me riding my bike, meaning coding things by hand. It's really slow, but you see what you're doing, okay? So I take text data, and I build a codebook from the text data. I use the codebook, apply it to the text data, and generate some network. Then I take the exact same data, use the entity extractor that I showed you, the thing that I talked about, it automatically extracts those things. It's the little Ferrari, and it really is a little Ferrari because it goes really fast. Building those things take a long time, but applying them, it's very fast. It's a matter of minutes, really. Whereas building a codebook by hand, have people done that? Build a codebook by hand? It's more a matter of weeks or more. Okay, so we have the bicycle, we have the Ferrari. Then sometimes you could go super convenient and you could say, well, you have a smart approach. You could have a text data collection, and with text data, you always get a lot of metadata. So for example, in the case of newspaper, think of index words that people or some algorithm assign to every article. So you could just take the metadata and say, I will not even bother looking into the content. I'll just take the metadata and all the keywords per article, I link to each other, and there is my network. A matter of seconds. Super Ferrari, high-speed train.
And then you could do the total opposite. This should have a snail somewhere. I will add that in. You could work with subject matter experts, which I also did. I sat down with the subject matter experts and we drew a map of all tribes in Sudan, all 248, for 8 years, one map per year, and all their connections. Now this is a matter of months. Takes a long time. So we have those 4 different methods, but they operate on the same basis, which is a corpus of text data. And they will give you they will give you vastly different networks, but we don't really know how different they are. But now we do. And I did this and I'll speak 3 more minutes. I did this for 3 different data sets. I did the same 4 methods on all 3 data sets. One of them is the Sudan corpus that I showed you. The second one is a corpus that I collected from something called Cordis, which is a database of all proposals that the European Union has supported with research money since the 1980s. That's 20 years of data, and it basically has for every proposal that got funded. I don't have the proposals that did not get funded, but for those that got funded, we know who proposed it, who are the collaborators, all those other metadata, how much money was awarded, all the keywords, and then we have the proposal description, right? The actual text of the proposal. So we have the text portion and the social network portion, who works with whom and what is the proposal about. And then I also used my version of the Enron email data, where you can do the same. You have who sends an email to whom, and then you have the body of the email data, okay? So those things are very comparable in that they are long-term, large-scale data, very different domain, nice, clean newswire data, scientific writing, which is also pretty clean, and then, messy email data. And what we found across all, I'll make this short actually, What we found, first of all, one big question is, when we use any method for automated network data construction from text data, does it resemble ground truth? Does it resemble the things I constructed with my subject matter experts? If it does, we can skip the lengthy work of subject matter experts. If it doesn't, we might still want to keep them around or integrate them in some smart way. And the answer is, no, not really resembled. With when we do the hand-coded textbook, I got 50% of the notes and 20% of the links that were also in the subject matter experts. With the fully automated thing, even less. And the only reason why the overlap between the manual code book and the thing with the subject matter experts was kind of high was because in the end, when we were done with my subject matter experts, I also took the list of tribes that we identified and put them in my code book, because this is how you develop a code book, by working from some ground truth data and expertise. But even then, the network overlap is pretty small. And when we construct, if you want to read this, my dissertation was about it, so and there's a paper too. When we construct different types of network, the social network of who talks to whom, versus we look into the semantic network of the text bodies or the proposal data or the email bodies associated with that, it's very different. They give us different views on the network. The social network, text-based social network, gives you a pretty good view into localized agents. There's a lot of references and mentions of people on the ground and local people. Whereas if we just take metadata, the thing where it's just constructed from entries in a database, it gives you a high-level view of the major international players, but hardly any people from that specific country. It's not really there, at least with the LexisNexis data we used. And there was a lot of LexisNexis data. It's not really there. The thing flips around when we look into the bodies, into the knowledge networks, semantic networks, things constructed from text bodies. Things constructed from metadata seem much more informative, and that's because the key indicators, the keywords that you assign to a proposal when you submit it, for example, are very good mini summaries of the data or of the text data that you already actually have in there. It's good descriptors. They read well, they are nice, good keywords. Whereas if you do knowledge networks, you get more broad concepts like research, science, methods, all of those things, but it's not very specific to the content domain. It's like what social networks do for text-based in terms of zooming in into details and culture, the text bodies do for metadata networks. And what do we learn from that? It's a happy ending to the story. So we will marry the Ferrari to the metadata. Those are both very fast methods. We use text. We look into the substance of text data by basically using automated entity detection and relation extraction. and combine that with the metadata network, because those two things together give you both things you want. They give you a high-level overview, a very general bird's-eye view of the key players, but also some deep flavor of the culture and more rich things that are going on in the domain. But see, you might see that here the actual hand coding book got eliminated. This can be replaced by combining these two methods together, which for me is a very happy ending of this research. Okay, that's basically what and I would have shown you more if we got bored here all through really fast. But we didn't. And to be a good citizen here, I quickly want to say, well, first of all, we're always sponsors, happy. And then, so how does this tie to, and here you can see how this ties basically to all the goals that were set up for this week, basically. So applying those methods to, how does this help to clarify national priorities? Using those methods to analyze large collections of inherently qualitative data, in a sense, in a large scale, can help us to scale up analysis that typically anthropologists and sociologists did by close reading methods to a much broader scale. We have all these we have all those rich qualitative data, but before we would, pick a few data points and then zoom in. Now we can also look at them on a more bird's eye view and then zoom in, but we can analyze them more quickly, more efficiently on a larger scale. And looking not only into, your common entities, people, places, organizations, but also all those additional cultural references, all the resources, all the knowledge, all the sentiment, all of that on a large scale. All right. So with that, if you have any questions or suggestions, or something in here seems debatable to you, which I hope it does, or you have any follow-up questions, let me know. I'd be happy to hear about it. All right, then. All right, any questions right now? Nobody fell asleep. I'm so proud. There you go.
I was wondering how much checking of the metadata you use before you use it in the computational methods.
Yeah. What do you mean by checking?
Well, for instance, I've had friends who tried to use Google Books as a source
Yeah.
of metadata, and they have to go through and hand code some of the metadata because it's so bad. And
See, this is because they are scientists, but go talk to some industry people. They don't. They rely on that. They take metadata as is, and if you look into it, metadata have also disambiguation issues. It's not that somebody at LexisNexis sat there and took all the different ways of how you can say Mohammed Osama al-Bashir, which is the president of North Sudan. There are many ways how you can shorten this version to just al-Bashir or Hassan al-Bashir or Mohammed al-Bashir, and then there are a lot of versions how you actually can spell Mohammed in English transliteration. Metadata have less of a noisiness than pure text data, but it's not perfect, but people often think it's perfect. And in the paper I have about this, it actually says about how perfect it's not. It's pretty good, but it's not perfect. I wouldn't even say it's good enough. But with a little bit of entity resolution and disambiguation, you get to good enough very quickly, actually. It's not a nightmare. Other questions? Comments? You guys want to take a break? I guess we ended right on time.
Are your papers up on the website?
Oh, no, on my webpage there is, I can show you that. I guess I'm not online right now. Am I? Nah. If you Google my name, there's basically only one Jana Diesner in the world, luckily. And it gets you right to my webpage, and on my webpage is a publication section, and it has those things there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.